Morning, everybody. How are you all on the third day of build?
Awesome.
Oh, wow, people still shouting awesome. That's amazing. All right, so today in the morning we are going to talk about Azure DevOps with VSTS. And you've seen a ton of DevOps stuff this week, including the keynote with Donovan, which is awesome. He even quoted me, friends don't let friends right-click publish. And if you want a sticker that says that, come up and see me afterwards. I have a bunch of them. They're good for getting into arguments with people who right-click publish. There's two of us presenting here. I'm here with my colleague Abel Wang. Abel, why don't you introduce yourself?
So how's everyone doing this morning? Nice, nice. So I'm super excited to be here today to talk to you guys about Azure and DevOps. But before we begin, I should introduce myself. My name is Abel Wang. I'm a senior cloud developer advocate here at Microsoft. So what is a cloud developer advocate, right? Big, long, fancy title. What does it mean? It's actually much easier if I tell you what I do. And what I do is I write code. I write a lot of freaking code. I eat, drink, live writing code, right? That's who I am. So I am that weird dude at Microsoft where I will spend all day in my office writing code, super stressful, right? So I go home to decompress. I play with my dog, I talk to my wife, we sit down on the couch and she picks the TV show to watch, because she always picks the TV show to watch. And I pull out my laptop and I start writing more code. Because that's what I love to do, right? So I'm that guy. So some recent roles that I've done, I've been a process consultant, I've been an ALM ranger. Currently, I write code with the VSTS team. I am on a team with Donovan Brown. I'm all about DevOps, of course, Azure, and Visual Studio tools. And some fun stuff about me, though. Back in the day, like that picture shows, back in the day, I used to be a rock star, like a real rock star. Or I thought I was a real rock star. Apparently, I wasn't very good because here I am in Seattle, and I'm talking about DevOps instead of being on stage playing my guitar. So that career didn't work out so well. But I am having fun here doing tech now. Some other fun stuff, I am a runner. One of my goals is to run the Great Wall Marathon on top of China on the Great Wall, because that would be unbelievably cool. But it's pretty rough. That's supposed to be the third hardest marathon. So I am training really hard for it, and we'll see if I can get to that in 2019. But that's who I am, and that's what I do. Cool. Damien?
Yeah, I am also a cloud developer advocate. I probably don't write as much code as Abel now. I talk about writing code a lot more than I actually write. I used to work at a company called Octopus Deploy. Has everybody knows Octopus Deploy? Yep. So 2 years ago was the last time I was at Build. And I worked for Octopus then, and I was on the booth at Octopus Deploy. So I already know a couple of people who spoke to me 2 years ago at Build. I kind of jumped ship, and now I'm working for Microsoft. What I love about this cloud developer advocate team and being able to work across the whole DevOps stack, Octopus was very much a release management kind of tool, right? So that was the part of the DevOps process that I cared about and could talk about. Now at Microsoft, I get to talk about everything. So if you want to talk to me about planning your work, if you want to talk to me about branching strategies, if you want to talk to me about convincing management that DevOps is a good thing to do, I'm happy to talk about any of that stuff. Right? I'm across the whole gamut of DevOps stuff, which is really cool. You can get hold of me on Twitter, and that's my website, which doesn't get much action. It's a blog that is like most people's blogs in that it gets updated once every few months. If you contact me on Twitter, by the way, unless I'm on a flight, if I don't respond within 20 hours or something like that, then call my wife, because I'm dead, right? She probably needs to know. I'm on Twitter like all the time. It is a little bit anxious for me, actually, because I can see the Twitter going off on my phone. So when Abel's speaking, I might be like replying to tweets. I'm not a runner, but I do surf, play beach volleyball. I do all sorts of Australian stuff. Because I am an Australian. I lived last year in Canada and I survived, which is awesome. Canada's lovely for the Canadians out here. It's just that there's something about not being able to go outside for 6 months that I'm not a fan of. So I moved back to Australia, and that's where I'm based now. But it's awesome being here at Build. This is the first time I've done a talk at Build, so it's really, really exciting. And as Abel mentioned, I'm part of a larger group of cloud developer advocates, and inside that group is the League, or the League of Extraordinary Cloud DevOps Advocates, which rolls off the tongue. That's a hashtag at the bottom, and again on Twitter, if you want to reach any of us, we watch that hashtag. It lights up messages in our team room. We can see that. We will respond to your queries. We've been doing it all week. We do it all the time. So if you have any questions, that's the hashtag to reach us on. If you want to talk about more broad things with development at Microsoft, then we're part of a larger group of cloud developer advocates, and I think there's 50-something now, 55, 56. Yeah. And they're across everything from Linux and open source to AI to .NET to Java to JavaScript and containers and everything. So there's some really, really, really smart people. They're generally hanging out at the lounge this week as well. So if you haven't spoken to them, go and have a chat. Go and pet some animals. There's in case you haven't seen, there's an animal pen in that lounge. So go and pet some emotional support animals. And they'll have a chat to you as well. So they're super accessible. All right, that's enough about us. That's not what you're here for. What you're here for is talking about DevOps. So why don't we start right from the beginning and talk about what DevOps actually is. Now, I come at DevOps from a very developer-centric point of view. I was a developer for nearly 20 years. I've been writing code since I was about 10 years old. And so my focus on DevOps is what it means for a developer. But DevOps means really different things depending on where you come from. So for me, as a developer, my focus has always been on how do I get my code out into production, and that's the part of DevOps I care about. The branching strategies, the build, the release, and now it's in production. But for an operations person coming into DevOps, they probably care more about availability of infrastructure and spinning up resources as quickly and as easily as they can to meet whatever aims are there. They talk about availability and scalability and all that kind of stuff as well. And that is also part of DevOps. So when we talk about DevOps at Microsoft, this is our definition of DevOps. It's the union of people, process, and products to enable continuous delivery of value to our end users. And I like to point out a few parts of this. We're going to talk about people, process, and products a little bit later. But the big thing to note there is that if anybody tells you, here's a product, it's a DevOps product, even us, and we might creep into this occasionally, if we tell you here's a DevOps product and it's amazing and it's going to solve all your problems, they're probably lying to you and trying to take your money, right? You can buy the product, that's fine, and that pays our salaries, and that's great. But unless the people are bought into this idea and unless the process supports it, you are not going to succeed. So it's not just the products. That is absolutely probably the least important part of that three-part thing there. The other thing I like to point out is it's about delivering value. And as a developer, I often think about value as, when you take a ticket from the left-hand side of your Scrum board and you move it to the right-hand side of the Scrum board, that's value, right? Well, it's maybe value, right? It's value to your manager maybe, but if you write a new feature and nobody uses that feature, you haven't delivered any value. If you introduce a bug, that's not value, right? And the other thing worth mentioning here is I'm not talking about code in this definition at all. There's no mention of code. Value can also be scaling up your web server when you get particularly high load over Black Friday sales or something like that, right? So DevOps is not about delivering code faster. That's a big part of it, sure, but it's about delivering value faster. And unless you measure what is valuable in production, you are just guessing, right? You can release a feature and you can guess that that is providing value, but you need to monitor it. You need telemetry, you need to judge whether that's valuable, feed that back into your planning, otherwise you are not doing DevOps properly. So that's what DevOps is. It's everything that delivers value to the customer. But the next question is, why is it important? Like, what's wrong with the way that we're doing things at the moment? And the biggest reason that it's important is because your competition is already doing it. If you have a bug in your system and it takes you 3 months to get that bug fix out, you are going to start losing customers to your competitor who can fix a bug in hours. Even if your customer is not somebody physically giving you money, if your customer is the HR department or the sales department in your company, right, they are going to lose customers because their system doesn't work effectively for them. Right? So even if you're not frontline customer-facing applications, you're still going to lose customers in the long run if you can't move fast. So DevOps is about increasing this velocity and reducing the problems that you have when you deploy software and when you deploy infrastructure. You're reducing the downtime, and by automating, you're reducing the human error. You can put better stuff out there faster and respond to change. It's the second decade of Agile. Right? So all the ideas of Agile applied to the entire software development process, including all of the planning and the monitoring of what's in production. So I mentioned before as well that this is a three-stage thing: people, process, and products. Why don't you talk about this, Abel?
Sure, absolutely. So, like Damien was saying, DevOps is all about continuously delivering value to your end users. And in order to do this in an organization, you have to address all three of these pillars: people, process, and products, in order to be successful. And if you don't address all three, you will not be successful. So with the people portion, this is probably the hardest thing to fix, because you're talking about culture. You need to have a culture where everyone from top all the way to the bottom is all on board, and everyone is in sync, thinking that they need to continuously deliver value, whatever that means. And at Microsoft, we did this fairly recently on the VSTS team, and when I say fairly recently, about 7 years ago, where we used to deliver new software once every 3-4 years. And today, we now deliver new versions of VSTS every 3 weeks, like clockwork, every 3 weeks. And what we don't tell people, but I kind of think we should, we're pushing bug fixes into production every single day, multiple times a day. So depending on the branch of code I'm working in, my check-in potentially could reach production on that very same day. That is moving at DevOps speed. But it doesn't come easily. You have to have a whole cultural shift where you buy into this DevOps mindset. And you need to have a process that will help enable all of this. So I'm not going to stand up here and tell you guys that Agile is the only way, although it kind of is, but I won't say that, except under my breath. But you do need to have a process that's going to let you iterate fast enough, yet still deliver code of high enough quality. So what does that mean practically? It means you need to have, well, you need to be able to track your work, right? And as you're tracking your work and checking your code in and out, I need builds to automatically kick off. And when these builds kick off, they're just going to grab the latest code. It's going to compile everything. It better run my unit tests. And if everything looks good, I want an automated system to pick up my bits and start deploying those bits through a pipeline. Dev, QA, UAT, all the way out into production. And I need this system to be automated, because I need this system to be repeatable and consistent every single time. Because remember, we're doing this multiple times every single day. And if human beings are involved, if humans are moving bits from one place to another and changing configuration files and things like that, guess what they're going to do? At some point, they're going to make a mistake, because we are humans and that's what we do. So if I can have an automated pipeline, that kind of removes all that. And I like to tell the story of, there was this very young dev that I knew. He did something pretty bad once early in his career, where he pushed code into the dev environment, forgot to change the connection string in his web config, and it was still pointing at production, and he started running tests, and bad things happened, right? Luckily, that very young dev did not get fired, because he kind of enjoys working right now. It was me. It was horrible, right? But that type of mistakes happens all the time. And that's why we need a system that is automated, repeatable, consistent every time, where we can test out our deployments from one environment to the next and make sure we don't have those problems. And once code reaches production, it doesn't end there either, because I need to be able to monitor my application. I need to know, well, as a developer, there are 3 things that I absolutely need to know. I need to know, is my app up or down? I need to know, is my app performing well? And I need to know, what are users doing in my application? Because if I know those things, that's what lets me know, am I delivering value? And that can help me prioritize what I'm going to be doing in my next sprint, and then we can rinse and repeat this entire cycle. So that's what we need in terms of all three pillars of enabling DevOps. But what about the tools? Well, there are a lot of different tools that we can use, right? We need to have a tool set that will let us plan and track our work. So if we're doing Agile, we need to be able to track our sprints and track any unit of work. And then we need to have systems where we check in our code, guess what? It can kick off our builds. So we need to have automated build systems. And we need to have an automated release system as well. And like I said earlier, it doesn't end there. With the code reaching production, I have to be able to monitor. And if you think about it, there are a ton of tools out there right now that can help enable DevOps. And I love each and every single one of these tools, if you go into Azure. And if you don't go into Azure, that makes me really sad, and nobody wants to see that, right? So go into Azure. But as good as all of these disparate tools are, guess what? There's one tool out there called Visual Studio Team Services that replaces all of this because it does everything. Cool thing is, you don't have to use every piece of it if you're already using Jira or you're already using something else. VSTS is built kind of like Legos, where you can just pop in and pop out whatever you need and just use the systems that you need. But out of the box, it can do everything that you need. And the reason why it can do that is because it can do everything. There's a source control system. And the source control system is just Git. There's also a central version control system as well. So depending on whatever flavor of source control system you like, guess what? VSTS can do it. There's a work item tracking section in there where you can track any unit of work in your software project. There's a build system that is so flexible where you can make it do anything that you want. There's a release system that, once again, you can make it do anything that you want. And we always say VSTS, it's for any language, targeting any platform. Because it absolutely is. It's not just for .NET. Whenever people hear VSTS, what do they think? Oh, C#, .NET, that's it, right? Yep. Any language, any platform. But Azure? What about Azure?
Yeah, so you can use all of those tools that were there before, and you can deploy to Azure. But if you are deploying to Azure, it's kind of, VSTS is kind of your no-brainer solution. Like that is the one that integrates with Azure so beautifully, and we're working on that every single sprint. We're working on that integration with Azure. And you might have seen the DevOps project that Donovan showed in the keynote on day one. You saw him use a DevOps project that was a Kubernetes cluster, so deploying to Kubernetes through VSTS, right, from Azure. So that integration is so tight there. And I know for a fact the night before that keynote, that was when they lit that feature up. So Donovan couldn't actually practice it before the keynote. So he did pretty well. He's my boss, I have to say. I think I'm contractually obliged to say that he's amazing every single talk I do. So you can see that we're actually investing in this stuff really, really heavily. So if we're using VSTS and deploying to Azure, that's kind of the best case scenario. But I think we've probably talked enough. Okay. And I think it's probably time to skip the slides. So why don't we look some more at that DevOps projects, and you can show us what some of that does.
Sure.
What number are you? You're 8.
I think I'm number 8.
Okay.
All right,
yeah,
perfect.
AV master.
Thank goodness you're up here, otherwise I'd never see our screen.
I just press the buttons.
Nice. Yeah. All right, so let's get real for a second. VSTS is definitely the ultimate DevOps solution into Azure, right? There, you can use any other CI/CD system you want to get into Azure, but VSTS is clearly the easiest and the best. But who here in this room likes setting up CI/CD pipelines? A couple hands go up, including Damien's.
Oh yeah.
Freak. Okay, whatever. So yeah, I set up CI/CD pipelines as well, but it's not my most favorite thing to do. But the cool thing now is in Azure, you now have the ability, with just a couple of clicks, to be able to complete and have a full CI/CD pipeline in the language that you want. And they're called Azure DevOps projects. And what do you get in this Azure DevOps projects? You get a team project in VSTS. You get sample code in the language that you picked. You get a CI, a build, and a CD release system that will take the sample code, compile it, run your unit test, And then it will go ahead and deploy this sample code all the way out into infrastructure that it has provisioned for you up in Azure. And you get all of this with just a couple of clicks. So, like Damien said, enough talking. Let me show you exactly how to do this. So the first thing we're going to do is jump into my Azure portal, and we're going to go ahead and create a brand new resource. And the resource that we want to create is an Azure DevOps projects. And now, on this screen, it's going to ask me, what language do you want to use? And this is probably one of my most favorite screens from a Microsoft product in a really long time. Because if you have super good eyesight, you'll be able to see that we support .NET, Java, Node, PHP, Python, Ruby, and Go. Wait, those aren't traditional Microsoft languages, right? Because any language targeting any platform. We say this over and over and over again, and hopefully you guys will start believing us. Any language, any platform. We support all those languages with more languages to come as well. So for this demo, I'm going to use a .NET Core application. So I'm going to choose ASP.NET Core. And now it's going to ask me, what infrastructure up in Azure do you want me to deploy this into? Do you want to deploy this into a Kubernetes cluster, a web app for Linux, a VM, or into a container? Now, for this demo, I'm just going to deploy into web app for Windows because it's pretty fast. And now it's going to ask me, what instance of VSTS do you want to use? You can create a brand new one directly from here, but in my case, I'm going to go ahead and use an existing one, and I'm going to use my demo account. So let me jump into my demo account. And we'll call this project Build 2018 Able. And we need to choose where we're going to deploy to, and since we are all in Seattle, let's deploy this to the West Coast. I click on Done, and bam, done. That is literally all I need to do. I can now, and I say this every single time, I can now kick back, relax, have a smoke. Well, I don't smoke anymore, so I quit, so I can't do that. But I can kick back and just let Azure do its thing. Now it's going to go ahead and create for me my team project. Then it's going to take sample code in the language that I picked, which was .NET Core, and it's going to go ahead and stick it into my repo in my team project. It's going to create for me a CI/CD pipeline that will take this sample app, build it, run unit tests, package it up, and then it'll deploy it all the way out into infrastructure in Azure that it provisioned for me. And when it's done, you get a portal that looks like this. Where on the left-hand side, you see your CI/CD pipeline. And on the right-hand side, you see all the infrastructure that it deployed for you up in Azure. I have my app service. I have my app service endpoint. It even has application insight, all ready to go. And all of these links that you're seeing right now, these links are deep links. So if you click it, it takes you directly into that particular service. Or in the case if I click on the code, it will take me all the way into the repo in VSTS. So as you can see, this is just my sample code. And if we go ahead and look at our build and see what type of build it created, we create a build for you that makes sense for the technology that you picked. So in our case, since this is a .NET Core application, we build a build pipeline that makes sense for .NET Core. We do a restore, we do a build, we run the unit test, and when everything's ready, we publish it and back up to VSTS as a zip file, right? And then we send it on down to a release, and just like with our build, we create for you a release pipeline that makes sense for the technology that you picked. So here's my release pipeline, and I want to go ahead and edit this, but you can actually see that it's already released all the way out into Azure. But we build for you a pipeline, and the pipeline completely makes sense for the technology that you picked. And because we're deploying into app service, it's a pretty simple deployment that we're doing. In this case here, we're just deploying into the dev environment. And from the dev environment, we have one task because it's just deploying an app service. Plain and simple. There's nothing more for you to configure. There's nothing more for you to install or tweak. Everything just works. And now, if we jump back into VSTS, or I'm sorry, jump back into our portal and click on the application endpoint, you can see, bam, our app already deployed into Azure. How long did that take me? Couple clicks, full CI/CD pipeline, all done.
Which is really, so this is really cool, right? This is an awesome way to kind of get started with this stuff, but I'm really conscious of what us Microsoft people do on stage a lot of the time, which is, hey everyone, here's how you do a hello world. Okay, now go and draw the rest of the owl, if you're familiar with that meme, right? So this is a great way of seeing how this stuff fits together and getting started, right? But if you have your own project, we kind of need to customize this stuff, right?
Correct.
And you saw the pipeline that it created, but I'd really want you to kind of show us how customizable this is.
Okay. So,
Good.
Absolutely, because yes, we created everything for you and everything just works, right? However, everything is still customizable where you can make it do whatever you need it to do. So let's jump back into our code. Remember, this is just a Git repo. So if I wanted to take, instead of the sample code, let's put my real code in there, right? Pretty easy to do. This is just a Git repo. I can go ahead and clone this environment onto my hard drive, pull everything down, delete all the files, put in my real code in there, push it back up, and hooray for that. My code will then be in the repo, and it kicks off my build and release pipelines, and then it will build my app and send it on through the CI/CD pipeline, right? So that's one way of doing that. But my app is actually sitting in GitHub right now. So it makes things a little bit easier because I can just do this. Let me jump to my build. Now in my build, let's edit my build. You'll notice that one of the first things that the build does is you tell the build, where is my source code sitting? And out of the box is getting it from the Git system in VSTS. My code is sitting in GitHub, so let's go ahead and just change it to GitHub. Now it's going to ask me for my personal token, and this is always extremely risky because I never know if I type it in correctly or not.
That was really fast.
What can I say? I type super fast.
You write a lot of code.
And hooray for that, it actually worked. Let me go ahead and find my Mercury web application. And we'll go ahead and select the master branch. I'll click Save and Queue. And bam, done. That's all I need to do. So now, instead of building my sample code that's sitting in a Git repo in VSTS, it's connected now to my GitHub repo that holds my real code. So anytime I check into GitHub, it's going to kick off this build system, compile everything, then deploy it down through my pipeline. So this works great, right?
Yeah.
But
I was going to make you do something real again, but do the next real thing.
you want me to do something real?
Yeah.
Oh man, okay. So this build is going to crater beyond belief. I really didn't want to show that and didn't want to mention it, but it will. And the reason why is because this build is, well, my app is actually much more complicated than the sample app, right? The sample app is just a sample .NET Core app. But my app, turns out, it does have a .NET Core portion. But it's a .NET Core REST API. It has an ASP.NET web front end, and it also has an iOS mobile portion as well. Quite a bit more complex.
Yeah.
Right. So is there a way for me to take this build that comes out of the box and tweak it and configure it so it builds all of that? Of course, the answer is yes, otherwise I wouldn't have asked that, right? So let me show you how to do that. Out of the box, the way that you configure and customize these builds, the build in VSTS is a glorified task runner. It does one task after another after another. Now, out of the box, VSTS comes with hundreds of tasks that you can just start using. Drag it to the right place, start using it. What if you want to do something that doesn't exist out of the box? Well, you can go to the marketplace, because the marketplace has 500 or so tasks now, I think, that's created by our partners that you can just download and start using. Oh, look at this. There's an Octopus deploy task that somebody wrote.
Yeah.
By the name of Damien.
Beautifully well written.
It's an amazing task. This is my favorite task ever. So if what you want to do doesn't exist out of the box, go to the marketplace. Download it and start using it. If what you want to do doesn't exist in the marketplace either, Are you in trouble? No, because you can write your own custom tasks too. Custom tasks, nothing more than PowerShell or Node.js. So what that means is, listen to this carefully, anything you can do from the command line, you can get this build system to do as well. Anything that you can do from a REST API, you can get this build system to do as well. That translates into the build and release system into VSTS. You can make it do whatever you want and whatever you need to make it do. Right? So I could go ahead and start dragging tasks to start building all 3 portions of my application. Kind of boring to watch me do all that. So what I was going to do is just show you the finished build. So I'm using a Windows agent, hosted agent. So our build system has hosted agents that you can use, so you can have no hardware and still build. And I'm going to build my ASP.NET front end, where I restore my packages from NuGet, scan my code using white source, build my solution, test all of my unit tests, package everything up, send it back up to VSTS. For my mobile portion, I have tasks where I can build an iOS application. Now, some of you might be thinking, but you can only build iOS apps on a Mac, right? Guess what? In VSTS, we give you free hosted Mac agents to use as well. And now, for my REST API, it's .NET Core, and turns out I'm using a Linux agent to build my REST API. To make matters just a little bit more complicated, my REST API, I want it to run in a Linux container, in a Docker container, in a Kubernetes cluster. So after I build my app, I create a Docker image, and then I push that image into a Docker container registry. So that's what my build does. Now, we can do the same type of thing for my release as well. So if we go ahead and look at the release, this is the release pipeline, kind of boring. 1 task, right? Nothing special. Maybe I need to have something like a QA environment. Maybe I need to have my production environment. Something else that I need to have, remember I have 3 parts of this application, right? I have a web front end, a REST API, and also my mobile portion. So maybe I want to be able to add another environment, except I want to deploy in parallel now my REST API into a Kubernetes cluster. And I also need to be able to deploy my mobile app as well. So once again, I'm not going to waste time, everyone's time, by dragging and dropping stuff. I end up with the release that looks like this, where I'm deploying in parallel to all 3 of my environments, my web environment, my API environment, and also my mobile environment. So for the web deployments, pretty simple deployment. I'm just deploying into Azure App Service, deploying my database. I'm deploying the database schema using a DAC pack. And when I'm done deploying, I run a set of automated UI tests to make sure that my deployment succeeded. Now, let's go back for a second, because for my REST API, I'm using the kubectl task to go ahead and deploy my container. And when I'm done deploying my container, I go ahead and run a web test against my Kubernetes cluster to make sure it deployed successfully. And finally, for mobile, I use App Service to deploy my mobile dev environment, QA environment, testers, all the way out into the actual Apple App Store itself as well. So this build and release system, granted, it starts off very, very simple out of the box, right, from the DevOps project, but you can customize this to make it do whatever you need to, even the most complex app that you can think of. And in this example, it's a mobile environment, it's a REST API into a Kubernetes cluster, and it's a web front end as well. What do you think?
I think it's pretty cool, but I also kind of knew what you were going to do.
I know, that's true. You've seen this once or twice.
Yeah, one thing though that's relatively new, which I think is worth mentioning, is so you've been clicking around and so on, and everybody knows I'm not a big fan of clicking. How do you manage this stuff? Like, this is all in the UI, right?
That's true.
And your code is in source control, and part of DevOps is everything in source control if you can possibly do it.
Yep.
So there's another feature, right?
Yes.
That can help you put this process into source control.
So I think what you're trying to tell me is as my processes get more and more complex, It sure would be nice if I could encapsulate my build and release pipelines, check it in, and then we can have pipeline as code. Is that what you're digging for?
That's amazing. That's exactly what I was thinking.
You know, the coolest thing is, yes, I love pipeline as code. The idea is you have your pipeline, your build and release pipeline. You can describe them as YAML files, check them into source control. It becomes super powerful because now your build and your releases is versioned right alongside with your source code itself. That is fantastic, right? And as you change your build and release pipelines, you just change these YAML files and they're automatically picked up. And you absolutely can do that today now. And actually, you can only do that with the build pipelines. The release pipelines are coming soon, but at this moment, it only works with the build. So let me show you what that looks like. So here it is. The easiest thing to do is, this is my build, right? This builds my ASP.NET Web front end. If you look at this, there is a View as YAML tab. So let's go ahead and click that. And of course, nobody can see that because it's tiny. But now what it has done is it's taken this task-based build system and translated it into a YAML file. So an important thing to think about is these YAML builds. This isn't some brand new build system. It's the exact same build system as our task-based build engine, except it has a new front end where you can describe your build as a YAML file, feed it to the engine, and then it will run it. So what we've done is we've taken this task-based build system, turned it into a YAML definition. Let me go ahead and copy this into my clipboard. I'll jump over to my code now. And then in the root of my repo, let me go ahead and add a new file. And the new file that I'm going to create, we'll call this file .vsts-ci.yaml. And from here, let me just paste in all of that YAML. We'll commit it into the repo. And now check this out. If we jump into our builds, it automatically creates a CI build for you that has just been kicked off. And let's go ahead and jump into this build. And you'll see, once this loads up, that every step that it takes is basically a task that is now translated into a YAML file. It's literally that easy to get started. This right here, if you are a DevOps person, oh, this should make you super happy. This is what we've been asking for a really, really long time. And now we finally have it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, so that's the answer to the question of that kind of infrastructure or the process in your code, all right? The one thing I skipped, though, is in your release process. We've got all this complicated stuff. We're going to all these different environments.
Yes.
But it's automatically going to those environments, is it?
Yep.
So how do we control that a little bit better?
All right. So we have a new feature that does exactly what you're talking about right now, and it's called release gates, and it's just gone general availability, GA. So let me show you that complex release again that we have, and let me go ahead and edit this really quickly. Where's my all up? Here's my all up release. Let me go ahead and edit this. So we now have the ability to create automated approval gates based off of continuous monitoring. So this becomes super, super powerful because we've always had the ability to add approval gates before and after each environment, right? And you can say, okay, before it can leave my QA environment, somebody has to approve it, a person has to approve it before it can flow into QA. Now we can automate this process based off of monitoring. So, for instance, let me show you what that looks like. I can go ahead and turn on my gates, and out of the box, there are 4 types of gates that you can add. And we'll start from the bottom and work our way out. First, you can create a gate by using a work item query. Now, this one we use in the VSTS team itself, right? So what we do is we query for blocking bugs. And if there are any blocking bugs, it will automatically, bam, stop that release right in its track. So a very useful type of gate. Another type of gate that you can create out of the box is the query for Azure Monitor Alerts. So this gate uses application insight. And if there are too many alerts being thrown, guess what? Bam, it will stop that release right then and there. And this one here, we use this to deploy VSTS as well, internally. So when we deploy VSTS, we deploy into all these different rings, and we let it sit in a ring for about 24 to 48 hours, where we turn on application insight and we turn on monitoring. And once again, as people are using our app, if there are too many alerts, bam, we automatically stop that release right then and there. So that's a really useful one. The next two gates, the invoke REST API and the invoke Azure function, those are the extensibility points for your gates. So using a REST API or using an Azure function, you can create your own custom gate and make it do whatever you need it to do. So the story that I like to tell all the time is that I was recently at a hospital, and they had a really interesting rule where you literally were not allowed to push into production unless a physical document was signed and uploaded to their DocuSign server. That was a rule that they had to have in place. So this was a manual process, and as you can imagine, this really slowed things down because a person had to physically go and check and see if the document was signed before they could approve and flow through the gates, right? But I also knew that DocuSign has a REST API that I could just wrap and call using one of my gates, so that's exactly what I did. So now my releases look something like this, where the first time I deployed into dev, they tested it, looked great, flowed on over to QA. A human being said, go ahead, let's go ahead and deploy it to the QA environment. Deployed to the QA, they ran some tests, everything looked good, human said it was okay, but then it hit my automated gate. Now when you create one of these gates, you get to set up what the polling frequency is going to be and also how long you want these gates to run for. So I said, let's poll every 5 minutes and let's run this gate for 48 hours. So the first time I polled, document wasn't signed, gate failed. 5 minutes later, it polled again, document still wasn't signed, gate failed. 5 minutes later, it checked again, voila, document was signed, hooray for that. It passed, and so it flowed through the gate, somebody approved it in prod, and then it flowed all the way into prod. So using these automated approval gates, this really lets you deploy faster, yet safer. GA, go ahead and try them. The last thing that's cool about them is you can take these gates now, package it up as an extension, and now you can put it in the marketplace where you can share it with all sorts of people as well. So if you remember, one of my gates that you can add is this get Twitter sentiment. That doesn't come out of the box. That's an extension that somebody at Microsoft wrote that will now go and check Twitter and look for the sentiment, see if the general public thinks a certain feature is good or bad, and if there are too many bad sentiments, bam, it will go ahead and block that gate. Right? So you can literally write whatever type of extension or whatever type of gate that you need to help you deliver faster and safer.
Very cool.
Yeah, cool stuff. GA, go and try it.
Yeah. You've been showing deploying to Azure web apps, right?
I have, yes.
That's not the scenario for everybody though, right? Who here still has applications that they deploy to a VM somewhere? All right, that's
quite a few people.
That's quite a few people, right?
So,
and yeah, I came from an Octopus deploy environment where that was kind of your use case, right?
So do you have a way where you can help these people on VMs?
Funny you should ask.
It is funny.
We're like a really natural pair up here.
Oh, it just flows, doesn't it?
It just flows.
So natural.
It's amazing. I'm going to take you back to, remember where we did the DevOps projects right at the start? If you were paying attention, you probably would have noticed when you choose some of these, and it's only available for a couple now, but if you choose .NET, for example, and then ASP.NET Core, you saw one of the options was virtual machine, right? So this is new as well. This came out, I think, in the last sprint, right?
Yeah.
This was made available. So if you choose virtual machine and continue, you can give the same information, but then you also give a virtual machine name, a username and password for that virtual machine. And you can choose the size of the virtual machine as well, like what actual VM it is. And we will spin up an entire DevOps project and the virtual machine infrastructure and everything like that to deploy your application to VMs, right? It'll build that same pipeline, but for VMs. Now, again, takes a few minutes to do that. So here's one I prepared earlier. And this is what it gives you. This is the release definition that it gives you. It gives you 2 phases with 3 tasks. The first one actually ties that virtual machine back to VSTS to say this is a virtual machine you can deploy to. And the next one deploys using IIS, like an IIS deployment of your website to that virtual machine. So this is probably really similar to what you'd be doing right now if you did this from scratch. There's a few things in here that make this possible. The first one is this idea of deployment groups. So we're in Azure, if we're deploying to an Azure app service, we're basically pointing at Azure and saying deploy to this Azure app service. But if you're deploying an application to multiple VMs, let's say you have 5 web servers, you probably don't want to have 5 tasks in there to say deploy it to server A, then server B, then server C, and so on. And doing that remotely across a VM gives you a whole lot of issues as well. You have permissions issues and all that kind of stuff, right? You need to jump onto that machine and do some stuff. So deployment groups are the answer to that. So let's have a look at what it's created here. If you go to deployment groups, and again, this is GA really recently. It's freely available and production ready. And we have this group here that it's created called ASP.NET, ASP.NET VM, which is the name of my application. So this is a group that contains a single target, which is a virtual machine with an agent running on it. So this is what was spun up by Azure when we created this DevOps project. We can also add tags. So if we have 30 machines in this resource group, we could add a tag to say this is a web server. And then in our actual application, when we go back to our release definition, we could say, well, for this particular task, this web application that we're doing, we only want to deploy that IIS website to the machines that are in that deployment groups. So the required tag, web server. So these tasks will run on every machine which is in that deployment group with a tag of web server. So you could have 30 VMs with all these different tags attached to them and deploy the right stuff to the right machines. Now, Abel showed you as well the hosted agents. What we really want to do here is rather than running on a hosted agent and trying to talk to these remote machines, it's much easier if we run those tasks on those machines. So the agent that we choose here for this deployment group are the agents that are running on those machines. So if you add a new phase, for example, you can add an agent phase, which is one of the hosted agents or my own agent, or you could add a deployment group phase. And that's saying run it on all of the agents on all the machines in the deployment group that I give you. So this actually physically runs on those VMs, which makes it really, really powerful.
So Damien?
Yes.
If I need to deploy to 30 machines, does it happen sequentially, or can I do this in parallel?
You have a lot of control over whether it's sequential or in parallel as well. It's amazing you didn't already know this, Abel. So you can see in this phase here, we can
something every day.
We can deploy to multiple in parallel. So at the moment, there's only one target, so it's going to do that one target in parallel, which is not that impressive. But you can also do the number of targets in parallel. So if you had 10 web servers, you could do 50% of them in parallel, and it will do a deployment to 5 of them, and then a deployment to the next 5. And it will do every task in here before it moves on to the next set. So what you can do in here, some techniques you can use are, for example, let's say you have 3 web servers, and you say, I want to do them one at a time. The first thing you want to do is pull the machine out of that out of that load balancer, deploy to it, run some tests, make sure it's okay, add it back into the load balancer. And then it'll do it for the second machine. Or you could do it for 50% of your 10 web servers. Take 5 of them out of the load balancer, deploy to them, add those 5 back once they're working, and then do it for the next 5. So you can maintain availability the whole time by doing it like this with parallel targets or even just one at a time.
So rolling deployments, not a problem there.
Rolling deployments, yeah.
Cool.
You can do that against the targets. So one of the other things as well is this is just deploying a website, right?
Yeah, what about most sites that I know of has a database. So is there something you can do to make that happen?
There is.
Imagine that.
Imagine that. It's a great question, Abel. So here's an example that I've got before, and this is deploying 2 VMs, but one of those VMs is the database server. So let's have a look at this. Oh, that's the release definition. Let's look at the build definition. And we can see we've done a few builds. We've got a couple of environments. And what it's actually doing when it releases are 2 phases. One is running an IIS deployment of my website into the deployment group. And it is running against just the web servers. You can see that is my required tags. There's 2 targets it can see in this deployment group. Right. So it's deploying to both of those in parallel. If I wanted to do the rolling deployments, I could do one target at a time and it would be fine. And it's only going to the web servers. I also have a phase, which is a deployment group that has a required tag of database. So my machines, my targets, have different tags for different roles, and it is doing a DAC deployment against the SQL server. So I have the file that I built in my build definition, just the DAC file, and I'm deploying that to my database server directly on a VM as part of release management. If I wanted to, for example, add a new machine to this deployment group, that's really easy to do. So let's say I wanted to scale up. I wanted a new web server. So what I can do is, let's say we'll add one to the prod group. If I wanted to register a new VM, I can click on that register there, run that PowerShell script on that machine. It will pull down the agent it needs, register with VSTS with whichever tags I need. I can add them in here as well. And now I have a new machine in this pool. When I deploy next, it will deploy to that machine as well.
Cool.
If it's not a Windows machine, I could do it on Linux as well. Remember, we can do any language, any platform. So I could have a web server farm made of Linux VMs running ASP.NET Core or Node or Go or whatever I wanted, and deploy 2 VMs as well.
That's freaking awesome.
So what's next?
Well, this is all good. We have shown how easy it is to create CI/CD pipelines. Mm-hmm. We have shown that we can deploy on-prem as well. But remember when I said earlier that it doesn't end with code hitting production, right?
Yeah.
We still need to be able to monitor. Do you have any?
Well, so here's where I'm going to throw a spanner
How do
in
we
the works
monitor?
a little bit. So, Abel,
Yes.
I've been looking at your wife's website.
What?
Yeah.
Uh-oh. This could be trouble.
So, Abel's wife actually is an author.
Yeah.
And I'm probably not the target audience. What type of books does she write?
She writes romantic comedies and murder mystery, funny murder mysteries.
Yep. So this is cool. This is an ASP.NET Core. Is it Core or is it Framework?
This is Framework.
Framework?
I wrote it quite a while ago. Oh my goodness! Did you really look at the app insights?
Yeah,
Oh
I did.
my goodness!
This is awesome. So
this is real, and this is real code that I wrote. This could be
real
bad.
code. You'd be shocked based on how much code Abel writes that it is not perfect. But what he's done is he's added application insights to it, and he stupidly gave me access to that. So let's have a look, and you can see right away.
He wasn't supposed to show like build.
Yeah. So we can see straight away, look, there's some failed requests.
Oh
right?
boy.
And I've drilled into these a little bit, so let's go and have a look and see what we can find here. I don't actually have access to the source code under this account, but what I want to do is I want to prompt Abel that maybe he needs to fix some stuff that I found. So let's have a look. I can see some 500 response codes, which is not a great response code for a public website. Sorry about that, Abel. Let's have a look at what's in here. So there's some contact pages. There's follow Nina's blog. That's interesting. Some book detail ones. Let's have a look at one of these, the follow Nina's blog. Let's see what's in there. And this gives us information about what people are seeing. And they're seeing an argument exception here. We can have a look at some of the details here. We can have a look at all of the telemetry for this root operation. So if there's some other telemetry attached to this GET request. We can even have a look at all the telemetry either side of it, which can be really handy for sorting out what caused bugs. If I go into the exception part here, I can see that we've got a parameters dictionary contains a null entry from for blog list. So there's an exception being thrown here against blog, follow Nina's blog. Hey, let's just do this. Blog, follow Nina's blog.
Public shaming at its best.
Public shaming. Yellow screen of death.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
So, this is not very good, right? So what I want to do is I want to tell Abel, you should probably fix this. But remember, I don't have access to the source code.
I should probably fix that now.
I don't have access to his VSTS, right? So I can't create a bug. And in a normal company, right, the person who's doing this kind of analysis maybe is not sitting next to the person writing the code. But if you've been paying attention, you probably noticed this cool little button here, create work item. So I've drilled into this exception in App Insights, and I'm going to create a work item for Abel to stay, fix your 500s, dude. And if I wanted to, I could assign it directly to him, but I'm going to let Abel delegate this, right? Because he's a bigwig now, and maybe he wants to give this to someone else. I'm not going to assign it to him. But you can see here, this actually came from Montreal, which is interesting. By the way, I found a whole lot of other ones from St. Petersburg, which you should probably look at. Yeah. This is a spider as well from Quebec. Yeah, interesting. Anyway, so I'm going to create this work item for you. And so what this is going to do is it's going to go into Abel's VSTS and create a work item
access to Application Insight.
So let's have a look. Let's skip over to Abel's one. He's just been jumping into VSTS panicking over here.
Yeah.
So this is what he's got now. And then he just refreshed. And right down the bottom, a bug. Fix your 500s, dude.
Yeah, I do need to. And luckily, Damien did find this for me, publicly shaming me, because now I can jump in. I hate it when you go off script like this, but now I can jump in and actually see what the error is, what lines of code, and immediately start going in and then fixing this, right? So although extremely embarrassing, very useful, and I will fix this
You
bug.
should fix that.
Yeah, I might even do it on stage right now while you keep on talking.
Yeah, maybe I'll switch machines and you can Sorry about that. So we've seen like a few different things here, right? We've seen that. I'll switch away from your machine. We don't want to see your code. There we go. Now you can fix it.
Thank you.
So we've seen
Horrifying.
seen the DevOps projects, right? We've seen that they are any language, any platform, right? So it's not just .NET. A lot of the stuff we've been showing you is .NET because we're both .NET developers from way back. Yep. But I've done demos with Node using VS Code, not even in Windows, and it will still run through VSTS, deployed to Docker containers running in Linux on Azure, right? All of this stuff is supported by VSTS and by Azure. We've seen the DevOps projects. We've seen that you can deploy to VMs as well. You can create YAML definitions. You can do approvals, even the new gates, which I would highly encourage you to check out. And then closing that gap, the monitoring and actually feeding that information back around that cycle into your planning process. So I've created some bugs for you to fix.
Buddy.
You're welcome. So there's a few resources that I wanted to share. This is probably the slide to take a photo of, unless you want to look at the slides online. This video's online as well. Yeah, so this is a few different resources of what we've shown you. Most of these will link to docs. Docs.microsoft.com is always the place to start when you want to learn how to do stuff.
Yep.
Any final words, Abel?
Yeah, don't give access to Damien to any Application Insight stuff. That's what I've learned so far. But if there's one thing that I want you guys to walk out of this session with, I want you guys to realize that VSTS, if you're going into Azure, it is a no-brainer to use VSTS. And not only do we have that CI/CD pipeline that can work for any language, targeting any platform, it's super, super easy to get started to go into Azure as well, right? Azure DevOps projects, couple clicks, and you're ready to go. That simple. If you have code that already exists, or you're going into VMs, or going on-prem, guess what? Damien showed, he really did actually show me some stuff I didn't know, like within those deployment groups. You can do stuff now for virtual machines and also on-prem. So if you're going into Azure, no-brainer. And like Damien said, there's all the docs. So thank you guys so much for your time. If you have questions, come on up and ask.